What's up, guys? And welcome back to the channel. Before we dive into today's story, if you're a fan of chilling mysteries and deep dives into cases that will keep you up at night, do me a solid and hit that subscribe button right now. Don't forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss an update. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss a single second of what we're about to unravel. For long years, a family has been searching, hoping, and praying for the return of a loved one. For years of sleepless nights, of unanswered questions, of a gaping hole in their lives that refuses to heal. The official file on Liam Sterling was stamped cold case, a collection of dead-end leads and faded photographs gathering dust in a forgotten corner of the Havenwood Police Department. But what if the answer wasn't in a far-off city or a shallow grave in the woods? What if the truth was buried right under their noses, hidden in a place of childhood ghost stories and forgotten history? Today, we're delving into a case that's as baffling as it is heartbreaking. A story of a disappearance that haunted a small town and the shocking discovery that finally brought a dark secret to light. This is the story of how police found a dead body hidden under a well, the body of a person who had been missing for 4 long years. The town of Havenwood was an expert at keeping secrets. It was a place nestled in a valley carved by a lazy, meandering river, a town where families had roots that ran deeper than the ancient oaks in the town square. They were intertwined in a complex web of shared histories, whispered rumors, and grudges that had been passed down through generations. In a town like Havenwood, everyone knew everyone else's business, or at least they thought they did. But the disappearance of Liam Sterling, 4 years ago, had been a different kind of secret. It wasn't a whispered affair or a quiet financial ruin. It was a deafening silence, a void that had ripped through the very fabric of the community. Liam had been 24, the kind of young man who seemed to cast a brighter light than anyone else. He had a magnetic smile, a quick wit, and an easy charm that drew people to him. He was the golden boy, the star quarterback who had led the Havenwood High Ravens to a state championship, the son who had returned home after college with ambitious plans to modernize his family's struggling hardware store. He was everywhere, a vibrant thread in the town's tapestry, and then, one crisp autumn night, he was gone. His truck was found parked by the old Riverside Trail, keys in the ignition, his phone on the passenger seat. There were no signs of a struggle, no ransom note, no goodbye letter. Liam Sterling had simply vanished. The initial investigation had been frantic and all-consuming. State police had been called in, helicopters had buzzed overhead, and hundreds of volunteers had combed every inch of the surrounding forests and riverbanks. They found nothing. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the search wound down. The news crews packed up, the volunteers returned to their lives, and a grim acceptance settled over Havenwood. Liam was gone. The case file grew thick with theories that he had run away to start a new life, that he had fallen into the fast-flowing river, that he had met with foul play at the hands of a stranger. But with no evidence, they remained just that, theories. The file was eventually boxed up and placed in the cold case archives, a monument to a question that had no answer. For Detective Miles Corbin, the Liam Sterling case was a ghost that haunted the halls of the Havenwood Police Department. He had been the lead investigator back then, a younger, more optimistic cop who had thrown himself into the search with a fierce determination. The failure to find any answers had been a heavy blow, a personal defeat that had soured him over the years. Now, for years later, Miles was a different man. His shoulders were a little more stooped, the lines around his eyes a little deeper, and the optimism had been eroded away, replaced by a weary cynicism. He was a month away from retirement, counting down the days until he could trade his badge and his ghosts for a quiet life of fishing and forgetting. The call that would change everything came on a sweltering August afternoon. It wasn't a frantic 911 call, but a curious inquiry from a construction crew. A developer from the city had finally bought the old Abernathy property on the edge of town, a sprawling, derelict estate that had been left to rot for decades. The centerpiece of the property was a grand, decaying Victorian manor that the local kids claimed was haunted. The construction crew was there to demolish it, to clear the way for a new housing development that promised to breathe life back into Havenwood. They were clearing the overgrown grounds when they found it. "You're not going to believe this, detective," the foreman, a burly man named Gus, said over the phone. His voice was a mixture of awe and unease. "We were clearing out by the old garden, and we found a well. Not on any of the plans. It's old, stone, and it's been sealed." Miles felt a familiar, unwelcome prickle of interest. "Sealed how?" "Concrete. A big, thick slab of it poured right over the top. Looks like it was done a long time ago, but there's something not right about it. Looks like it was done in a hurry. Sloppy. Ordinarily, an old sealed well wouldn't have been a police matter. It would have been a historical curiosity, a footnote in the property's long history. But Havenwood's secrets had a way of festering in dark, forgotten places. "Don't touch anything, Gus. I'm on my way." The Abernathy property was even more dilapidated up close than it looked from the road. Weeds choked what had once been a manicured lawn, and the manor itself seemed to sag under the weight of its own decay, its windows like vacant eyes. Miles found the construction crew gathered in a silent circle in what was once a rose garden, now a tangled mess of thorns and overgrown bushes. In the center of the clearing was the well. It was exactly as Gus had described it. A low, circular wall of weathered, moss-covered stones, about 4 feet in diameter. And on top, a thick, ugly slab of gray concrete. It was jarringly out of place, a modern scar on a relic of the past. The surface was rough and uneven, confirming the foreman's suspicion that it had been a rush job. As Miles crouched down to examine it, he saw something else. Scratched into the surface before the concrete had fully cured were faint initials. Ellis. Miles's breath caught in his chest. Ellis. Could be a coincidence. It had to be a coincidence. But the cold dread that washed over him told him otherwise. This was a place for secrets. A place to make something disappear. Getting through the concrete was a laborious process. The construction crew used a heavy-duty jackhammer, and the deafening roar echoed across the property. A stark contrast to the years of silence that had shrouded this place. A small crowd had gathered at the edge of the police tape that now cordoned off the area. Curious neighbors, the construction workers, and a few local reporters who had gotten wind of the unusual discovery. Miles noticed a car he recognized parked down the street. It was Chloe Sterling's, Liam's younger sister. Chloe had been just a teenager when her brother vanished, but the trauma had aged her beyond her years. She had never given up hope, not in the way her parents had, who had retreated into a fragile shell of grief. Chloe had been relentless. For years, she had run a social media page dedicated to finding Liam. She had put up fresh flyers every few months, and she had called Miles at the station every year on the anniversary of his disappearance, just to make sure he hadn't forgotten. Miles saw her standing by her car, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, watching the proceedings with an unbearable intensity. He knew he should go over and say something, but what could he say? "We found an old well, Chloe. It's probably nothing." He couldn't bring himself to give her another dose of false hope or, worse, to be the one to confirm her deepest fears. After what felt like an eternity, the jackhammer fell silent. The concrete slab had been broken into large chunks, which 2 workers now lifted away with crowbars. As the last piece was removed, a wave of foul, stagnant air washed out from the darkness below, a smell of decay and damp earth that made several of the onlookers gag. Miles leaned over the edge, his flashlight cutting a sharp beam into the abyss. The well was deep, perhaps 30 or 40 feet, its stone walls slick with moisture. The beam of light reflected off something at the bottom. It wasn't water. It was a tangled mess of dirt, debris, and something else. Something wrapped in thick, industrial plastic sheeting, bound tightly with what looked like heavy-duty zip ties. The air grew heavy and still. The idle chatter from the onlookers ceased. Everyone knew, without a word being spoken, what they were looking at. The recovery was a slow and somber affair. The local fire department's technical rescue team was called in. A firefighter, harnessed and equipped with a breathing apparatus, was carefully lowered into the well. The silence was absolute as everyone watched him work, his movements precise and methodical as he attached a harness to the bundle. Slowly, carefully, the winch began to turn, and the grim package was lifted from its tomb, inch by agonizing inch. As it emerged into the daylight, the reality of what it was became undeniable. It was roughly the size and shape of a human body. The plastic was caked in mud and grime, but it was clear that it had been wrapped with a grim purposefulness. The medical examiner, Dr. Evans, a woman whose stoic professionalism Miles had always admired, was already on site. She directed the placement of the bundle onto a gurney and, with a gloved hand, carefully cut one of the zip ties. What happened next would be seared into Miles's memory for the rest of his life. As the tension on the plastic was released, a small object, caked in mud, fell out and clattered onto the ground. It was a silver ring, a simple band with a distinctive design etched into Eda Raven in flight. It was the championship ring from the Havenwood High Ravens' victorious season. Liam Sterling's ring. He had never taken it off. A collective gasp went through the small crowd. Miles heard a single, strangled cry from the direction of the street. He turned to see Chloe Sterling crumble to her knees, her face a mask of utter devastation. The last 4 years of hope finally and brutally extinguished. The secret of the well was out. Liam Sterling had been found, and Miles Corbin's retirement would have to wait. The ghost that had haunted him for 4 years was back, and this time it was demanding justice. The investigation into the disappearance of Liam Sterling was now a murder investigation. As the forensic team began the meticulous process of documenting the scene, Miles walked over to the edge of the well one more time. The initials, Ellis, scratched into the concrete, seemed to mock him. They weren't Liam's initials. They were a signpost, a deliberate marker left by the killer. But what did it mean? Was it a taunt? A clue? Or just a random act of cruelty? As he stared into the dark, empty hole, Miles felt a chill that had nothing to do with the setting sun. He knew that digging up Liam's body was only the beginning. The truly difficult part would be digging up the secrets that had been buried with him. Secrets that someone in the town of Havenwood had killed to protect. The silence had been broken, and the echoes were just beginning. The autopsy of the body found in the well confirmed what everyone already knew, but the clinical details painted a grim picture. The cause of death was blunt force trauma to the back of the head, a single devastating blow. Liam Sterling had been murdered. The state of the remains suggested he had been placed in the well shortly after his death, 4 years ago. The meticulous wrapping of the body and the sealing of the well spoke of a killer who was not just brutal, but also methodical and determined to hide their crime forever. For Miles Corbin, the confirmation of murder was like a starting pistol firing for a race he wasn't sure he had the stamina to run. Retirement was a distant dream now, replaced by the all-consuming pressure of a high-profile homicide. The Havenwood Police Department was small, more accustomed to dealing with traffic violations and teenage vandalism than calculated murder. The case file on Liam's disappearance was retrieved from the dusty archives, its pages now imbued with a new, sinister significance. Every interview, every dead-end lead, every unsubstantiated rumor had to be re-examined through the lens of homicide. The first and most painful task was to speak with the Sterling family again. Their home, once a place of boisterous family gatherings, had become a quiet, somber sanctuary of grief. Liam's parents, Tom and Mary, seemed to have aged a decade in the few days since the discovery. Their faces were etched with a profound, hollowed-out sorrow. Chloe, however, was different. Her grief was sharp, edged with a cold, simmering anger. "You have to find who did this, detective," she said, her voice low but firm, as she sat across from Miles at their dining room table. Photos of Liam smiled down at them from the mantelpiece. Liam at his graduation. Liam holding the championship trophy. Liam with his arm around his little sister. "For 4 years, we've had nothing. No answers. Just nothing. Now we know. He didn't leave us. Someone took him from us. We're going to do everything we can, Chloe," Miles promised, the words feeling inadequate. "Who hated him?" he asked gently. It was a brutal question, but a necessary one. Tom Sterling shook his head. "Nobody hated Liam. He was a good boy. Everyone loved him. It was a common refrain in the early days of a murder investigation, the canonization of the victim. But Miles knew that reality was always more complex. No one was universally loved. Business rivals? Old girlfriends? Anyone he had a falling out with? This time it was Chloe who answered. There was Ryan Peterson, his old business partner. They had a disagreement right before Liam disappeared. The name Ryan Peterson was already circled in red in the old case file. 4 years ago, he had been Liam's best friend and business partner. They had grown up together, two sides of the same coin. Liam was the charismatic frontman, the face of their ambitious plan to buy and renovate old properties in Havenwood. Ryan was the quiet, meticulous numbers man, the one who handled the finances and the logistics. Their partnership had soured just weeks before Liam vanished. Miles found Ryan Peterson at the same construction supply company he had been managing 4 years ago. He was older now, his face leaner, his hair showing hints of gray at the temples. He had an air of nervous energy about him, his eyes constantly darting around. When Miles mentioned Liam's name, a shudder seemed to come down over his face. "It's a terrible thing," Ryan said, his voice flat. "A terrible thing for his family. You and Liam were having some problems before he disappeared," Miles stated, watching for a reaction. "Something about a property deal that went bad?" Ryan's jaw tightened. "It was a business disagreement. It happens. We were young, ambitious. Liam wanted to take a big risk on the old Abernathy property. I thought it was a money pit. We argued. That's all. The Abernathy property. The same property where Liam's body had been found. The coincidence was too glaring to ignore. He wanted to buy it, and you didn't?" Miles pressed. "I thought it was a bad investment," Ryan insisted. "The place was a ruin. It would have bankrupted us. Liam, he could be impulsive. He saw the potential, the romance of it. I saw the numbers, and the numbers didn't add up. Your argument, it got heated? We yelled. We both said things we shouldn't have. He told me he was going to buy it without me, that he'd find another partner. I told him he was a fool." Ryan looked away, his gaze fixed on a stack of lumber in the distance. "That was the last time I saw him. We were supposed to meet the next day to clear the air. He never showed up." Ryan had an alibi for the night Liam disappeared. He had been at a poker game with several other local business owners. An alibi that had been checked and confirmed 4 years ago. But alibis could be flimsy, and friendships could curdle into something much darker. The next name on Miles's list was Jenna, Liam's girlfriend at the time. Their relationship had been passionate and tumultuous. Jenna, now married with a child, was hesitant to talk. Her eyes filled with a sad, haunted look as she recalled the past. "We were fighting a lot," she admitted, sitting in her pristine, suburban kitchen. Liam was. He was under a lot of pressure. The business with Ryan, his family's store. He was pulling away from me. He was becoming secretive, staying out late. I thought he was seeing someone else. "Did you have any reason to think that?" Miles asked. Jenna hesitated, twisting the strap of her purse. He was getting calls at odd hours. He'd walk out of the room to take them. He was jumpy. And there was money. I found a bank statement once, a withdrawal for several $1,000s from his business account. When I asked him about it, he just got angry and told me to stay out of his affairs. The secretive phone calls and the unexplained withdrawal were new pieces of information, details that had been missed or dismissed in the initial chaos of the missing person investigation. They painted a picture of a Liam Sterling who was more complex than the golden boy everyone remembered. He had secrets of his own. As Miles dug deeper, he began to peel back the layers of Liam's life, and a more complicated portrait emerged. He wasn't just the charming town hero. He was a young man in over his head, juggling the expectations of his family, a failing business partnership, and a crumbling relationship. And it seemed something else entirely. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A retired librarian who had been a notorious town gossip contacted Miles. "You should look into the history of that Abernathy property, detective," she had whispered conspiratorially over the phone. There are stories about that place. Stories about what's buried there. Following the old woman's advice, Miles spent an afternoon in the town archives, sifting through dusty property records and yellowed newspaper clippings. He learned that the Abernathy family had been one of the town's wealthiest founders, but their fortune had been lost during the Great Depression. The last of the family, a reclusive old man named Silas Abernathy, had died in the manor decades ago, rumored to be a paranoid eccentric. The stories the librarian had mentioned were local legends, whispers of Silas Abernathy hiding a fortune somewhere on the property before the banks could seize it. It was the kind of ghost story that every small town had. But then Miles found it. A newspaper article from the 1930s, detailing a notorious bank robbery in a neighboring county. The thieves had made off with a substantial amount of cash and were never caught. The article mentioned unconfirmed rumors that the robbers had connections to Havenwood. It was a long shot, a wild piece of local folklore. But it sparked an idea in Miles's mind. What if Liam, a history enthusiast who loved the town's old stories, had stumbled upon something? What if he believed the legend of the Abernathy fortune was true? It would explain his obsession with buying the property, an obsession that seemed irrational to his business partner. It would explain his need for a large sum of cash. Maybe he wasn't buying the property as a legitimate investment. Maybe he was buying it for what he believed was hidden there. Miles felt a jolt of excitement, the first he had felt in years. It was a wild theory, built on whispers and speculation, but it was the first thing that made a degree of sense of Liam's strange behavior in the weeks leading up to his death. He decided to pay another visit to the Abernathy property. The demolition had been halted, and the estate was now an active crime scene, cordoned off with yellow tape. He walked through the overgrown garden, past the now empty well, and up to the decaying manor. The front door had been boarded up, but Miles found a broken window at the back. He hoisted himself through, his flashlight beam cutting through the thick, dusty darkness inside. The house was a time capsule of decay. Furniture was draped in white sheets, like sleeping ghosts. The air was thick with the smell of mold and rot. Miles made his way through the cluttered rooms, his footsteps echoing in the silence. In what must have been a study, he found a large, ornate desk. Most of the drawers were empty, but one was locked. Using his crowbar from the trunk of his car, he pried it open. Inside, beneath a pile of moldy papers, was a small, leather-bound journal. The handwriting was old-fashioned, the ink faded. It was the journal of Silas Abernathy. Miles's heart pounded as he carefully turned the brittle pages. Most of it was rambling, paranoid nonsense about the government and the banks. But then he found a page with a hand-drawn map of the property. There were several locations marked with an X, but one of them stood out. It was the old well in the garden. And next to it, Silas had written a cryptic phrase, "Where the water ends, the future begins." It was a stunning discovery. Liam must have found this journal. This was his secret. He wasn't chasing a ghost story. He had found a map. He believed there was a fortune hidden in that well. And he had told someone who had wanted the fortune for themselves. As Miles stood there in the dusty, silent house, holding the old man's journal, the pieces began to click into place. Liam's murder wasn't about a soured business deal or a jealous lover. It was about greed. Old-fashioned, cold-blooded greed. He now had a motive, but he still had a crucial question to answer. Who else knew about the journal? Who had Liam trusted with his incredible secret? He thought back to his interviews. Ryan Peterson, his business partner, who had so vehemently opposed the purchase of the property. Was his opposition genuine? Or was it a clever misdirection? Had he seen the numbers and realized that the real value of the property wasn't in its development potential, but in what lay hidden beneath it? The ghosts of the past were starting to speak, and they were telling a story of a hidden treasure and a deadly betrayal. The path to finding Liam's killer was no longer cold. It was leading him straight back into the heart of Havenwood, to someone who had been hiding in plain sight for 4 long years, their guilt buried as deeply as Liam's body had been. Miles left the crumbling manor, the journal carefully placed in an evidence bag, a renewed sense of purpose coursing through him. The hunt was on. The discovery of Silas Abernathy's journal changed the entire complexion of the investigation. The focus shifted from personal vendettas to a treasure hunt that had ended in murder. Miles was now convinced that Liam had found the journal, become obsessed with the legend of the hidden fortune, and shared his secret with the person who had ultimately killed him and taken the treasure for themselves. The key was to figure out who Liam would have trusted with such a monumental secret. His thoughts kept returning to Ryan Peterson. Ryan's vehement opposition to buying the Abernathy property now seemed suspicious. If he had known about the potential treasure, convincing Liam to drop the idea would have been the perfect way to get him off the scent, allowing Ryan to pursue it himself. The alibi at the poker game was solid, but a murder could be planned. A meeting could be arranged. Miles decided to bring Ryan in for a formal interview, not at his business, but at the station, where the sterile environment and the weight of the law could unnerve him. He laid out the evidence on the table between them: a photo of the well, a copy of the journal page with the map, and the bank statement showing Liam's large cash withdrawal. "We know why Liam wanted that property, Ryan," Miles said, his voice calm and even. He wasn't just being impulsive. He had found this. He pushed the copy of the map across the table. Ryan stared at the paper, his face pale. For the first time, his composure seemed to crack. I don't know what that is." "It's a map, Ryan. A map to a fortune hidden in that well by a paranoid old man in the 1930s. A fortune Liam believed was real. A fortune he withdrew thousands of dollars for, likely to buy equipment to get to it. He must have been excited. He must have told his best friend, his business partner." Ryan shook his head, his eyes wide. "He didn't tell me anything. I told you we were fighting. He wouldn't have trusted me." "Or maybe he did," Miles countered, leaning forward. "Maybe he told you and you saw your chance. You realized that if you could get rid of Liam, you would have it all to yourself. You argued with him about the property purchase as a show, to distance yourself from it. You arranged to meet him that night, perhaps at the well itself, under the pretense of looking for the treasure together. And then you killed him." "No!" Ryan slammed his hand on the table. "That's not what happened. I wasn't there. I was at the poker game, you know that?" The denial was fierce, but Miles detected a note of genuine panic in his voice. He was hiding something, but Miles wasn't sure it was murder. "Then what did happen, Ryan?" Ryan slumped back in his chair, his face in his hands. He was silent for a long moment before he finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "He did tell me. He showed me the journal a week before he disappeared. He was like a kid who'd found a winning lottery ticket. He was completely obsessed. I was the one who told him he was a fool. I told him it was a ghost story, that he was crazy for believing it. That's what our big fight was about. Not the business loan. It was about the treasure. I was angry that he was willing to throw away our entire business on a fantasy." He looked up at Miles, his eyes filled with a desperate sincerity. "I was harsh, Detective. I said some things I regret. But I didn't kill him. I swear. The last thing I ever said to my best friend was that he was an idiot. I have to live with that for the rest of my life." The confession, filled with regret and shame, felt authentic. It didn't sound like the calculated denial of a killer. If Ryan was telling the truth, then Liam had told someone else. Someone who, unlike Ryan, had believed him. Miles went back to the evidence, his mind racing. He thought about the initials scratched into the concrete that sealed the well. For days, he had been stumped by them. They weren't Liam's initials. But what if they weren't letters at all? What if the killer, in their haste and in the darkness, had made a mistake? What if the L was actually a C, and the S was for Sterling? C.S. Chloe Sterling. The thought was so monstrous, so unthinkable, that Miles immediately dismissed it. Chloe? The grieving sister who had relentlessly pushed for answers for 4 years? The one who had collapsed in grief when the body was found? It was impossible. And yet, he couldn't shake the thought. Her grief had been real, he was sure of it. But her relentless crusade to keep the case alive, was it born from a desire for justice, or a fear that her brother's body would never be found, leaving her secret safe forever? Her anger, which he had mistaken for righteous indignation, could have been a manifestation of her own guilt. He had to be sure. He drove to the Sterling's house, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. He found Chloe in the backyard, tending to her mother's rose garden. "Chloe, I need to ask you something about the night Liam disappeared," he began, his voice gentle. She looked up at him, her expression wary. "What about it? Did Liam tell you about the Abernathy property? About what he believed was hidden there?" For a fraction of a second, her composure faltered. A flicker of something fear? Panic? Crossed her face before it was replaced by a look of confusion. The hidden treasure? That was just a silly old story. "He found a journal, Chloe. A map. Ryan Peterson confirmed it. Liam told him everything. It's hard for me to believe he wouldn't have told his little sister, the person he was closest to in the world." Chloe stood up, wiping her dirt-covered hands on her jeans. "He mentioned some crazy idea, yes. I told him he was being ridiculous. That was all." Her denial was too quick, too dismissive. "I think he did more than mention it," Miles said, his voice hardening slightly. "I think he showed it to you. I think you were the one who believed him. You were excited. You two were in it together." Chloe's face, which had been a mask of controlled grief for weeks, began to crumble. Tears welled in her eyes. "We were," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He was going to use the money to save the family business, to give our parents the retirement they deserved. He was doing it for us." The confession hung in the air between them. Miles felt a profound sense of sadness. He had his answer, but it was not the one he had wanted. "What happened at the well, Chloe?" he asked, his voice soft again. The story came tumbling out, a torrent of words held back for long years. She and Liam had gone to the well that night, filled with a nervous excitement. They had brought shovels and ropes. Liam had been the one to go down into the well first. He had found a small metal box, just as the journal had described. It was heavy. As he was attaching it to the rope for Chloe to pull up, he had lost his footing on the slick stones. He had fallen, his head hitting the stone wall with a sickening crack. "He didn't move," Chloe sobbed, her body shaking with the force of her grief. "I called his name over and over, but he didn't answer. I knew he was gone." Panicked. "I didn't know what to do." In her terror-stricken state, she had made a series of devastating choices. She knew that no one would believe it was an accident, not with the story of the hidden treasure. They would think she had killed him for it. So she had hidden him. She had spent the rest of the night filling the well with dirt, covering her brother's body. The next day, she had bought bags of concrete and, under the cover of darkness, had sealed the well, scratching what she had intended to be her own initials into the wet cement as a private, twisted memorial. "The money?" Miles asked. "There was no money," she said, her voice hollow. "The box was full of old, worthless papers, deeds and letters, Silas Abernathy's personal effects. The legend was a lie. He died for nothing. I killed my brother for nothing. It was a tragedy, born not of greed, but of a terrible accident and a subsequent panicked cover-up. Chloe had not murdered her brother, but her actions had led to his desecration and had condemned her family to 4 years of agonizing uncertainty. She had lived a double life, the grieving sister and the keeper of a terrible secret. Her relentless push for the police to keep investigating a strange, subconscious penance, a desire to be caught and for the truth to finally be revealed. The aftermath was somber. Chloe Sterling confessed to the illegal disposal of a human body and obstruction of justice. The town of Havenwood, which had been so sure that a monster had been living among them, was left to grapple with a more complicated and heartbreaking truth. There was no evil villain, only a sister who had made a terrible mistake and had been crushed under the weight of it. For Miles Corbin, the resolution of the Liam Sterling case was a bittersweet victory. He had found the truth. He had closed the file on the ghost that had haunted him, but it brought him little satisfaction. He had uncovered a family's deepest tragedy and, in doing so, had deepened their wounds. A week later, Miles put in his retirement papers for the final time. As he cleaned out his desk, He paused, looking at the file on his desk, now officially stamped case closed. He had solved the mystery of the well, but he knew that the echoes of that night, of a young man's life cut short and a sister's life ruined, would linger in Havenwood for a long, long time. The town had its answers, but like the treasure in the well, some truths were not liberating. They were just heavy,